Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the very first church history ever written by Eusebius. We're going to take a look at pages 299 to 331. It'll finish up chapter 8 and it will begin chapter 9. And there are only 10 chapters or 10 books that make up his church history, so this is the penultimate lesson. There's only one more lesson after this. Basically, his church history takes us from Tiberius, the emperor when Christ was crucified and resurrected, to Constantine, and we'll see Constantine show up in this lesson. So we know we're getting close to the end of his church history. Let's go to block 1 and look at martyrs in Alexandria. They endured torture devices of every kind. They were hung from gallows, and their limbs were pulled apart by machines. They were stretched in stocks. They could have gained freedom by offering sacrifice to an idol of the emperor, but they chose death instead. They chose to remain faithful to Christ. Now, martyrs in Asia Minor and elsewhere, the town of Phrygia, all citizens were Christian. Therefore, the entire population of the town was burned to death, including women and children. In other areas, many were killed by axe, or had their legs broken, or were hung upside down over a fire to be tortured to death. In Antioch, they were roasted on gridirons. To escape capture, many believers committed suicide. In Pontus, they had molten lead poured down their bare backs. And believe it or not, a new edict was issued, and if you can believe this, Christians were to have their eyes gouged out and one leg maimed. They were to be blinded and maimed so they would suffer for the rest of their life. Thus was the persecution in the 3rd century. Now let's take a look at note 3, faith proven through blood. Anthimus of Nicomedia was beheaded. Lucian of Antioch was executed. Tyranion of Tyre, Eusebius of Sidon, and Silvanus of Emesa were thrown to wild beasts. Eusebius the physician was tortured to death, and Silvanus of Gaza was beheaded along with 39 others in a mass beheading. Now, Diocletian, Chlorus, and Constantine. Diocletian suffered an illness that deranged his mind. This caused a split in the Roman Empire. Remember the book of Revelation. The prophecy was given that eventually Rome would fight within itself, and they would kill each other as the judgment of God would be poured out on them and peace would be removed. Now it comes true. The prophecy is fulfilled. There was a split in the Roman Empire as different persons sought the throne, resulting in a fragmented Roman Empire. Constantine became ruler in one of the divisions, the Western Division, after his father, Chlorus, died. Now, Maximentius claimed the leadership of the East Province of Rome. He was a cruel tyrant who lived a carnal lifestyle and practiced witchcraft. He stole money from the senators, and he aligned himself with Maximinius, becoming a military-based authority of the East. And they built many pagan temples to Zeus. So we learn that in block 1, the persecution under Diocletian was horrifying. Horrifying torture under Diocletian. I mean, Christians were to have their eyes gouged out and their leg maimed so that they could end their lives living in blindness and being crippled. But the empire split. Fighting emerged between various military leaders vying for power in the empire. Let's go to block 2. Constantine rises up. The imperial recantation. After 10 years of brutal persecution under Diocletian, things came to an end. And Eusebius says this is, nobody thought and nobody knew, everybody interpreted it as the divine providence of God himself. Galerius suffered horrible disease, which he interpreted as punishment for the cruel persecutions he had ordered. He ended up confessing God and ordered the end of all persecutions against the Christians. He also gained endorsements from the other emperors because the empire was split at the time. Galerius was one of those vying for power. Now, note 2, imperial ordinances are announced to end persecution, endorsed by Galerius, Constantine, and Leninius. All Christians that were expelled were allowed to return to the faith. Congregations could reassemble as long as they did not disturb the public order. And then Constantine is exalted. Galerius died shortly thereafter. Diocletian and Maximian retired, and Maximian later committed suicide. Constantine was proclaimed most perfect emperor. He vowed to be favorable toward the faith, as was the rule of his father. His father was always favorable toward the faith. Constantine took up the same lineage of his father. Now, as I said, this is exactly what was prophesied in the book of Revelation, that the Roman Empire would split and fight within itself, as Christ would remove the peace and judgment against Rome would take place. So we see this is a fulfillment of what was prophesied in the book of Revelation, most assuredly. Let's move on to block 3. And we look at the apparent relief. After the imperial recantation, Maximinius of the East only reduced persecution, not completely stopping persecution. He didn't comply with the recantation. However, the provincial governors did follow the recantation, releasing all Christian prisoners, including those that were in the mines. Maximinius of the East renewed repression. He restricted where Christians could live. He erected statues of Zeus in all the cities. He was raising up pagan temples. And so he was actually erecting statues of Zeus. He rejuvenated persecution of the Christians. He drew up engraved tablets to be posted in the provinces of blasphemy against Jesus Christ. Therefore, under this tyrant, there are new martyrdoms. In Phoenicia, 3 Christians were thrown to wild beasts, including Sylvanus the bishop. Peter of Alexandria, the bishop, was beheaded along with other Egyptian bishops. Lucian the elder of Antioch was executed in prison. Documents of blasphemy were posted in all provinces. Now the content of the Maximinius tablet of blasphemy. Here's what it said. We have shaken off the blinding fog of the Christians, their darkness of ignorance. The gods of Rome sustain us from their damnable folly. The Almighty Zeus inspires us, protecting us from the immoral Christians. Let them be driven out of every province. Now, God brings judgment again. Famine, plague, and war. Famine and plague and blindness struck out against Maximinius of the East. I think it's ironic that this plague resulted in blindness. So here he was sending an edict to blind Christians, and now a plague hits that blinds the members of the reign of Maximinius. And he was also attacked by the Armenians. Victory for Constantine and the death of the tyrants. Constantine declared war on the tyrants of the east. Remember, Constantine was emperor over the west. Maxentius and Maximinius both fell. Constantine gave glory to God for the victory because, remember, he saw the vision of the cross. In this sign, you will conquer. Constantine gave glory to God for his victory over the Eastern Empire. So, at this point in this penultimate lesson, we have traveled with Eusebius from Tiberius, the emperor during the crucifixion and the resurrection, all the way to Constantine and his reign. And Constantine reigned from AD 306 to AD 337, 306 to 337. We have one more lesson to go, but we have a great look now at Block 1, Continuing Persecution under Diocletian. Horrible, horrible martyrdom and torture. And then we have Block 2, the Recantation, signed by the fragmented empire, but from the emperors of that fragmented empire, Galerius, Constantine, and Lianius. And then we saw the exaltation of Constantine. But all of this was interpreted by the church at the time as judgment from God. It was interpreted as the sovereign judgment of God, as prophesied by the Apostle John in the book of Revelation. It's exactly what took place. If you remember our study in the book of Revelation, it was prophesied that Rome would split, they would fight between themselves because, quote, peace would be removed. And peace is the irene in the Greek, means healing of fragmentation. If you remove the healing of fragmentation, you have fragmentation. Rome fragmented. They fought between themselves, and that was God's judgment poured out on the beast. Remember, the beast was beast-like emperors of Rome. It was the judgment of God poured out on the beast-like emperors of Rome. But we see a vision for Constantine, and now we have reached that period in church history of the reign of Constantine, AD 306 to 337, which puts us on target for our final lesson that will come up. He wrote 10 books. His church history is 10 books, but they're really 10 chapters. I mean, he called them books, but really it was 10 chapters that make up his church history. We're covering 8 and 9 here, so in the next lesson we're going to cover 9 and 10, and we're going to wrap up Eusebius and his church history. But here, the things that really stick out are, of course, Diocletian. What a horror to say, gouge out the eyes of Christians and maim one leg. Let them live out their life in blindness and being crippled. And then in Block 2, the persecution is coming to an end because disease arrives, plague arrives as punishment from God, and a recantation of persecution is issued and signed by Galerius, Constantine, and Lianius. And then this judgment continues with the exaltation of Constantine and the empowerment of Constantine for the West to defeat the East. The East had an alignment of tyrants. Constantine of the West, he took over his father's kingdom in the West, and he was favorable toward the faith, and he was empowered to defeat the tyrants of the East. So, in our penultimate lesson, we have persecution, recantation, and exaltation of Constantine. Persecution, Block 1, recantation of persecution, Block 2, and Exaltation of Constantine, Block 3. That takes us from 299 to 331. We'll pick up next time in page 332.